I would say we need a democracy movement because we need a democracy.
Not free speech! Money is not free speech! Not free speech! Money is not free speech! Money is not free speech!
I like to say that the most dangerous threat to democracy in the United States of America is the mistaken belief that we actually practice one. Because democracy is not a noun, it's a verb. Demos means the people. Kratia means rule. So the word democracy from the Attic Greek means the people rule. We have the trappings of democracy. You get to go and pull a lever every 2 to 4 years. Oh, only for candidates that have been pre-approved and pre-selected by the ruling elite. But when it comes to actually participating in a meaningful way in how our society is organized, you know, how much pay you might get, whether or not you get health care, whether this country goes to war or not, whether we should address the climate crisis, you know, those kinds of questions, we the people never have an opportunity to participate.
Imagine if you will, the debate around health care had there not been elected officials with a commitment to pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. If the priority wasn't making sure there were profits for people that make drugs and sell drugs and people who provide medical care as insurers, if they weren't the priority and we were the priority, don't you think that would have been different? That's an immediate difference in your life. Right now, there are folks who are worried about Medicaid, Medicare. Would that be an issue at all if the priority wasn't, let's make sure there's enough profits for the corporations? I don't think so.
The prison system, along with the education system and the healthcare system, are three things amongst many others that I believe should never have a profit motive attached. The Corrections Corporation of America has been going around the states in 2012 and 2013 and asking states that are cash-strapped in their budget, hey, we'll take over your prisons. One of the stipulations is that if we take over your prisons for you, we'll pay you for them and we'll give you money, but you got to keep them at 90% capacity. And that basically attaches a profit motive to criminalizing American citizens.
The democratic self-government experiment that was started in the United States over 200 years ago has gotten completely corrupted.
We are not being listened to. We, the real people, are not being listened to.
It's when people say we can buy elections, which we've seen happening, and when we see people say we don't want to let people vote, those are all little signs that pretty big signs that our democracy is in trouble.
The Move to Amend's amendment that we're promoting will basically break the iron grip that wealthy individuals and corporations have over our democracy and allow the people to rule as they're supposed to.
Today, we have an un-American attack on that creed of equality.
You can't be free if you don't have a home.
It's time for an intervention, y'all.
Money is not political speech.
I wake up on any given morning in Salt Lake City, and the second I go outside, I'm breathing, depending on what day it is, the dirtiest air in the country or maybe even the world. And then I go to eat some food, and the prices of that food are determined by giant corporations. The place where I get the food is often a giant corporate grocery store, and it's often bad for me or downright poisonous, and I don't have a lot of options to eat different kinds of food. And then I go to travel to one of my organizing meetings, and since corporations control the kinds of transportation we're provided. I have to often take a car on a giant freeway instead of taking public transit or walking. And then I get to the meeting, and a lot of the decisions we make are often done inside the box of what corporations have gotten us to think is possible. And on the way back from there, I pass giant billboards telling me how inadequate I am and what I need to buy. So my entire day is basically controlled in this tight little area that corporations have decided it's okay for human beings to live and survive.
When considering the still unfolding history of these United States, the words of journalist Molly Ivins ring true. It is possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties established in our Constitution to everyone in America. In other words, who, according to our laws and culture, gets to be considered a person? The law creates legal personhood, and movements create law and change culture. So, how have the courts passed laws to shape our culture? That history goes way back before Citizens United. 1819, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, Supreme Court case, turned a corporate charter from a government-granted charter to a contract. This ruling gave corporations standing within the Constitution. 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Though the court did not rule on corporate personhood, the decision was subsequently cited as a precedent to hold that a private corporation is entitled to the same 14th Amendment rights of due process and equal protection as human beings. This makes it impossible for us to make laws that treat local businesses any differently than giant multinational corporations, even if their business practices are deemed to be harmful to workers, the environment and communities, or if they have a history of violating the law. Hale versus Henkel, 1906. The court granted corporations the Fourth Amendment search and seizure protection. Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, 1919. The Michigan Supreme Court says the business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. Stockholder primacy is established. The purpose of the corporation, according to the court, is no longer to serve the public good, as it had been. It is now to maximize profit for shareholders above all else. Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mahon, 1922. Corporations get the Fifth Amendment takings clause, meaning if you pass a regulation that impacts a corporation's ability to make a profit, that is deemed a taking, and they can sue for the right to future profits lost. This creates a chilling effect, and local and state governments become much more hesitant to pass laws in the public interest for fear that corporations can claim loss of potential profits that cities and states will be on the hook to pay. Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976. The Supreme Court rules that spending money to influence elections is protected under the First Amendment, in effect saying that money is speech. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010.
Today, the Supreme Court of Chief Justice John Roberts declared that because of the alchemy of its 19th century predecessors in deciding that corporations had all the rights of people, any restrictions on how these corporate beings spend their money on political advertising are unconstitutional.
The court's ruling threatens to undermine the integrity of elected institutions across the nation. It's a rejection of the common sense of the American people.
Move to Amend is the only organization right now that is very clear on what needs to be done with respect to the constitutional amendment. Specifically, we declare, or we want declared that corporations are not people. And we also want to declare that money is not speech. In every other organizations, they're mostly concentrated on Citizens United, money is not speech. To that, we always have to ask a question. How much better was our politics pre-Citizens United? Not much better. And the reason it wasn't better is that second portion was missing, corporate personhood.
It is clear that this country is suffering from a crisis that is deeper than the economic crisis or the ecological crisis. We are suffering from a crisis of democracy. And I say that because there are supermajorities on issue after issue, whether you're talking about healthcare, foreign policy, economic questions, education, or political reform, that clearly support substantive reforms, yet those reforms have not come into effect.
Every single one of our fundamental human needs are being violated on a daily basis. And until we get democracy back in this country, through overturning Citizens United and overturning corporate constitutional rights, we're not going to have a democracy that can function for the 300 million plus human beings in our United States.
I've been watching it for some 30 years now, but I never really felt like I needed to do anything about it until Citizens United.
We should be in the Capitol throwing all the lobbyists out, meeting with our congresspeople and telling them what we would like them to do to make this a better country.
If we, the people, don't do something about corporate constitutional rights, that not only our government, the United States of America, is going to go down in flames, but we are going to take the entire planet with us.
We have to be less vertical and more horizontal. And the horizontal there is focusing on a democracy movement that will help all of us achieve the individual solutions we want.
Every other issue that I care about, whether it be the climate, whether it be workers' rights, whether it be education for our children, whatever it is, it tends to be very hard to get things done without these kinds of reforms. Because the people who write the checks, the ones who are prowling around in the state capitol with their fat checkbooks and their nice suits, they're the ones that get the legislators' ears.
There's going to be considerable opposition, and there's going to be opposition within the corporate media, and strong opposition, which is going to make the job a little harder. But never underestimate the power of the people when they understand the message. Never underestimate that. I think that this is something that can be done quite quickly. I think it's something that can be done rather efficiently. It's just going to require a large enough parade. It's going to require a large enough people to understand the core concepts. And that's the real work that we have to do right now, is hit that critical tipping point, which is probably around 20 or 30% of the voting populace actually understanding the issue.
And a big part of the issue when creating a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy movement is an understanding of how race and racism were constructed in the United States through law, and how those laws informed our culture in much the same way those corporate rights have been constructed through the law to ensure rule of the wealthy minority over the majority, and how our culture reinforces and legitimizes that lack of democracy. Right from the very beginning, Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution defined people as property. You see, the authors of the Constitution were very interested in protecting their property, including slaves. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. Indigenous communities are forced from their homelands. Over 10 years, 100,000 native children and adults marched thousands of miles west into unknown arid territory. 15,000 do not survive the journey. But over 25 million acres of land is made available for white settlers. 1854, the People versus Hall. Non-whites are barred from testifying in court. No black, mulatto, or Indian shall be allowed to give evidence in favor of or against a white man. 1857, Dred Scott versus Sanford. Free blacks are taxed, but still have no rights of citizenship granted to whites. 1862, Emancipation Proclamation in District of Columbia. Slaves are freed in D.C., but former slave owners are reimbursed for slaves given up. Whites are paid over $1 million in reparations for lost property. 1862, Homestead Act. 50 million acres of formerly indigenous land in the West, having been violently invaded by U.S. soldiers in violation of treaties, is distributed by the government at low cost to white settlers only. And 100 million acres of indigenous land are given for free to railroad developers. 1882, Chinese Exclusion Act bans immigration of both skilled and unskilled Chinese laborers. 1924, Johnson-Reed Act creates an immigration quota system based on national origin, favoring Nordics over the inferior races of Asia and Southern and Eastern Europe. 1934. In the wake of the Great Depression, the National Housing Act is implemented, creating a federal housing authority to provide loans and federal subsidies for home ownership. But the FHA mortgage underwriting standards discriminate against non-whites and investment in non-white communities through a process called redlining. 1942. An executive order forces 111,000 Japanese Americans into concentration camps. And the war on drugs declared by Richard Nixon violently targets and imprisons people of color disproportionately through today.
Righteous anger can only be provoked by anger at injustice or unfairness. And I'm angry about the fact that we've got 20 to 25% of the children in the richest country in the world who go to bed hungry or undernourished every night. I'm angry about the fact that we have transnational corporations that are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself. And I'm angry about the fact that the world that's being created with the rape and plunder of Mother Earth is a racist, sexist, and class-oppressive society. You bet I'm angry. I'm angry because it doesn't have to be this way.
Are we in a class war right now?
Of course we are. And, you know, Warren Buffett, I think, said it the clearest. He said, we're in a class war, and we've been in a class war for years, and my class is winning. And who is his class? The owning class, the people who own these corporations.
In our day, certain economic proofs have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living, the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Justice Douglas, the greatest champion of the First Amendment that this country has ever known, once said that the Bill of Rights is a badge which says, "To government you shall go no further." What is the impact of corporations wearing that badge?
Because after 106 years in America, through the best of times and the darkest of hours, she knows how America can change. Yes, we can. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do. So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made?
The second thing that I think happened that we'll look back on and understand this as a critical moment is that we elected a president through a lot of grassroots effort. The young people in this country really made a historic difference electing a black president with a huge amount of hope. And I think that their expectations were not met. The system itself was a failure.
That's why it's really critical that we do more and we not just wait for elected officials to take care of this for us. This is what every single social movement that has come before us has done when they recognize that the system is really flawed and it's not working and the people in power are not going to self-correct. But it's time for the people to step in, and there's actually a process in our Constitution to do this. This isn't new. It doesn't happen very often, but whenever there is a system that is so out of balance, we've seen people's movements come together and respond by inserting human rights or correcting the issue to make clear that the priority needs to be on the people.
There is another history of the United States, and this is where you come in. This is the history of people coming together and rising up to change laws and change the culture. 1791, Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution were adopted to protect we the people from the excesses of government. At the time, we the people protections only extended to white male property owners. 1865, 13th Amendment, slavery abolished. Civil Rights Act of 1866 extended the rights of emancipated African Americans. Congress passed this by overriding an attempted veto by President Andrew Johnson. 1868, the 14th Amendment, black males get equal protection under the law. 1870, 15th Amendment, black males get the right to vote. Social change in 1886 included a major campaign for the 8-hour workday. Knights of Labor were 1 million strong. Populists drew up the Cleburne demands. Eugene Debs builds the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen. In 1913, the 17th Amendment, the U.S. Senate will now be elected by the people instead of appointed by state governments. 1920, the 19th Amendment. After 75 years of struggle, women get the right to vote. 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. Schools could no longer be segregated based on race. Separate is not equal. The Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s protected voting rights, prohibited discrimination by federal and state governments, and prohibited discrimination in housing sales and rentals. 1971, 26th Amendment. The voting age is changed from 21 to 18. If an 18-year-old could be drafted to fight and die in war, certainly they could vote. 1973, Roe versus Wade. Supreme Court rules that anti-abortion laws violate a woman's right to privacy. Abortion was legalized.
If we look back in 50 years, we will realize just how completely and systematically we were being ruled.
Of course we had to end slavery. Of course women had to get the right to vote. Of course you could organize unions and they're not a criminal conspiracy. Of course Jim Crow segregation law has to end. Of course 18-year-olds have to get the right to vote if they're dying for their country. But this is the thing, Dennis. Every one of those movements seemed impossible when they began. And it was only when ordinary people began to get together and have conversations about how the society is organized and about what their desires are.
What's at stake is the country that I love, that we the people, a country that this was the great American experiment, that could the people rule rather than being ruled by the wealthy or the aristocrats. And we chose to have the people rule, to check or limit the power of government, to limit the power of the wealthy, to hold down the masses.
If you're not seeing the kind of change you want, I'd say ask yourself why you're not getting that. And chances are very good it has to do with the fact that our democracy is not working for the people. So whatever your number one issue is, you should make this your number two, because without this kind of change, it's going to be very hard to win the other reforms that we all want.
An issue that I think people used to think was too complicated for regular people to understand. And when it's in front of them, they're voting, not just 50% plus one, not even just 55%, not even just 60%, but 70, sometimes even over 80% in support of calling for an amendment. I think that's one thing that definitely proves that there's no question where people stand on this.
The reality is that this is a vital struggle. If Move to Amend doesn't succeed, then we will continue to live in a society in which corporations call the shots, both in our courts, in the halls of Congress, in the executive branch, and increasingly at the state and local level. And we've already seen the consequences of that.
So I actually think that right now it's really a world historical kind of a moment, but I even think that beyond the amendment, it's so much broader than that. We're really not just talking about an amendment that gets rid of corporations. We're talking about in a completely new way of understanding what democracy is, why it's important, and how our economic systems globally will need to be reconstructed.
We've got to build a movement step by step, intentionally and deliberately, to create the world that we want. And that means it needs to be social, it needs to be political, it needs to be economic, and ultimately we need a legal system that codifies under law a peaceful, just, democratic, and sustainable world. And when you talk about it that way, no. When I talk about it that way, I can have that conversation at an Occupy encampment, I can have that conversation at a Tea Party rally, I can have that conversation at a pool hall or a bowling alley. And ordinary Americans agree with me. Not on everything, but on the fact that something's not right and it doesn't have to be this way. That's where the agreement is, and that's the sweet spot of real solidarity.
How many gifts can a congressman take and somehow remain a good man? And how many times must good parents cry 'cause their little ones must sleep in a van? How many bribes can corporations give before their bribes are forever banned? The answer, my friend, is move to amend. The answer is move to amend. How many birds will fall from the air because they can no longer breathe? How many burdens can we the people take while Congress continues to deceive? How many billionaires will write all our laws while we the people still believe? The answer, my friend, is move to amend. The answer is move to amend. How many wars must our young people fight, like in Iraq and in Afghanistan? How many mothers and children must die from our drones and tanks in their lands? How many senators would send their own sons 'cause they truly believe in their stance? The answer, my friend, is move to amend. The answer is move to amend. The answer, my friend,